years at the University of Guelph. Geoff worked for a large Ontario beekeeper in the summer to help pay for his education. After completing his BSc in agriculture, Geoff started working for the Ontario Tech Transfer Program and then completed an MSc researching honeybee genetics and varroa control. Geoff started as the provincial specialist, apiculture, with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Ag in 2009, where he deals with all things bee-related. Geoff's focus is on maintaining a healthy honeybee industry for the benefit of beekeepers and agriculture in general. So it's my pleasure to welcome Geoff Wilson here to the screen. And we will have probably up until about maybe 12:25 for presentation, and then we'll definitely take some questions over the last 10 minutes or so. Go for it, Geoff.
Thank you for the introduction and the invitation to talk today. Yes, so I'm the provincial specialist in apiculture based out of Prince Albert, covering the whole province. And I do have a colleague that I work with, and he'll be introduced later, but his name is Graham Parsons, also working in Prince Albert. So a little bit of background. We're going to deal with 3 different types of bees today. We're going to deal with honeybees, leafcutter bees, and we're going to deal with other wild bees. So we'll start with honeybees. I'm mostly involved with the honeybees, but I do deal with the other bees as well. There are about 1,200 registered beekeepers in the province. They can have anywhere from 1 colony up to 6,500 colonies. Typically, we say we are a very commercial-oriented honeybee industry in Saskatchewan when we compare it to a province like Ontario, British Columbia, because we have about 10% of our beekeepers are commercial, running between 100 and 6,500 colonies. Most of the commercial beekeepers have between 1,200 and 2,000 colonies. When you compare it to other industries like Ontario and British Columbia, it is exactly it is completely different. While we have about 90% of our bee colonies in commercial hands, they have maybe 20% of their colonies in commercial hands. So they will only have 5 or 6 or 7 commercial beekeepers, and the rest of their colonies are held by hobby or sideline beekeepers. Saskatchewan is noted as being a really good place for honeybees. We've got some of the best crops in the world, and a lot of that has to do with the forage that's available. And this is a great picture. I love this picture. It shows a really nice reason why we do so well. We've got very long days in the summer. We've got lots of nice different crops. Here we have yellow sweet clover with white sweet clover in the foreground, and then a nice field of canola in the background with some forest and pasture land in behind. Really good demonstration of why it's such a good place to keep bees. The industry is based on canola. So 90% of our honey that we sell is canola. So honeybees are dependent on canola for their production, and beekeepers are dependent on canola for production. And the canola industry is also very dependent on honeybees and leafcutter bees. We produce about $40,000 worth of honey per year, but that's only a tiny bit of the value of honeybees for the province. And then the real value comes from pollination. So we are the largest producer per hive of honey in the country, and we go toe-to-toe with anywhere in the world. Our provincial average is about 200 pounds per hive, and then and which is the greatest for all of the provinces. Our nearest neighbors, Manitoba, is the closest, being about 165 pounds per hive, while Alberta is about 120, 140 pounds per hive. A lot of that is because of beekeeping techniques that our beekeepers use. They're very advanced, very progressive beekeepers, and they're on top of their game. Plus, our region is really, really good for honey production. Now, when you get into other provinces like British Columbia, Ontario, the forages change, and they're producing maybe 75 pounds per hive, or less than half of what we produce per hive. The leaf cutting bee industry is completely different. Yes, they're both producing bees, but if you're a honey beekeeper, your techniques will not work for leafcutter bees. They're completely different insects. It's like trying to farm chickens and cattle exactly the same. It just won't work. There's really about 80 producers producing with about 50,000 acres, and this is actually increasing at the moment. And they're producing about 4 to 5 million kilograms of alfalfa seed per year at about 115 kilograms per acre. Last price that I heard was about $3.80 per kilogram. Of course, that fluctuates. But the real key for the leaf cutting bee industry is actually the sales of the cocoons or the bees. So on that acreage, they put out about 20,000 bees per acre, which is called 2 gallons. A gallon is not actually a volume. A gallon is 10,000 bees, and they double every year. So that's about 1 billion bees they're putting out, and they get about 1 billion bees or 2 billion bees back. And the price of the bees over time has varied from $10 to $100 per gallon. And then that's a very short time range from 2019 to 2024. So a lot of fluctuation there. And the value of that bees is worth about $20 million. So when they're selling cocoons, of the surplus 1 billion bees produced, about 500 to 750 million cocoons or bees are sold to hybrid canola production. So production of the hybrid seeds that a lot of our canola producers are planting. The remainder goes to U.S. alfalfa seed production. So they have a problem in the United States where they have too much disease and they can't double every year, or they have a hard time keeping their numbers. So the excess goes into that market or into the New Brunswick blueberry pollination industry, where they're using them to make wild blueberries. So the little tiny blueberries. So these industries have very big players. So they are very large beekeepers with serious sized businesses. Uh, they, uh, they, we have beekeepers, especially the large ones, that are making millions of dollars worth of honey per year, or very large leaf cutting beekeepers that are having very large numbers as well. Here we have demonstrations of basically the warehouses for honeybees. On the right-hand side, that's just honey super storage or equipment for the bees to be able to make honey. In the middle picture, we have stacks of blocks for basically um, where the bees return, the leaf cutting bees return and lay their next generation where they have the cocoons. And you can see these are very highly stacked. In both cases, you're using forklifts that lift to their maximum height in order to stack everything. And we have an incubation room where they're incubating the bees. And on the bottom here, we have a honeybee keeper returning back to their facility with actually 4 very large trucks filled with honey, and these honey supers on the back of the trucks will be extracted. So that's after a single day of pulling honey in a beekeeping operation. Wild bees are a completely different story. Um, These are not managed by anyone. It's very difficult to manage these bees. 70% of these species nest in the ground, and 30% nest in woody material, stems, or holes in logs, those sorts of things. These are typically solitary insects. Sometimes they're gregarious, which means they can be solitary and gregarious, which means that a bunch will live together, but they're acting by themselves. They are typically live a single year and forage for very short times. So they need food now, basically, and they don't really store very much resources. We can't really call it honey, but the nectar and the pollen, they can't really store it very well. So they need a constant supply of nutrition. They typically forage for very short distances. So these bees will only forage for 50 to 200 meters, while honeybees will forage up over 2 miles, 3 miles, so 5 kilometers. And these bees are either there's so many different species. They can either be generalists feeding on all the different species out there that are flowering to very specialists. Some bees will only feed or on a single flower species. Most of these live in what would be termed a hole in the ground. So they live in a nest, and basically there's tunnels down in there, and they reproduce down there. And so they need to have undisturbed soil. So they need spots that aren't tilled every year. They need to have a spot where they can raise their families. And here's just a few pictures of some wild bee species on the right-hand side. Now, we also have some that are, they're somewhere in between that. They're semi-social. They're somewhere between the solitary and the colony forming species. And these are typically like bumblebees. They're closest in biology to honeybees. They do overwinter as a single bee, so a single queen, which will establish a nest, and then it will make the colony. These are excellent generalists. They love cold temperatures relative to the other bees, so they'll be flying at 10 degrees while honeybees are still hiding out in their hives trying to keep warm. And they're active throughout the entire season. So these are one of the most common bee species that we get questions about that are not honeybees. Okay, so that's kind of the introduction or background of the different bees and the different industries associated with bees. Now, who's really involved with bee health? Well, the answer is pretty much everyone. So we've got beekeepers who are involved, leaf cutting beekeepers, honey beekeepers, provincial governments, agricultural producers, agrologists, NGOs or non-governmental organizations, the general public and research. So the beekeepers have a vested interest. And yes, I do have more slides and pictures of honeybees because I work more closely with them than the leafcutter bees. But both the leafcutter bees and the beekeepers are very interested for their own personal finances in keeping these bees healthy. They've got a very vested interest where they want healthy bees so they can continue to keep their agricultural businesses alive. We have agricultural producers. So yes, every farmer out there has a role in bee health. What the agricultural producer does to their land or does to their hedgerows is going to affect bee health. They are also a big receiver of the benefits from these bees. There's a lot of NGOs or non-governmental organizations involved, and they range from people that are specifically interested in bees to people that are interested in the environment to people that are interested in agriculture. So this is just a little bit of the NGOs on the web. That's just because it fit nicely on the slide. I could have kept filling this slide just absolutely packed full. So we have groups like Canadian Association for Professional Apiculturists, which is a group that deals with people like myself and bee researchers that are out to promote bee health. We've got funding organizations like Project Apis M and Pollinator Partnership, which provides research money or funding for bee projects. Xerces Society promoting things like pollinator strips and bee health, as well as other insects. And even organizations like Ducks Unlimited, what they do also really helps the bee industry, adding un, adding good land that allows for the nest sites, the alternative forages. And general public definitely has a role. Sometimes we in agriculture forget about the general public as having a role in what we do and why we're doing it, but they definitely have a role. They are definitely an active participant in what we do in agriculture, and they're an active participant in bee health. So a lot of the policies come from pushes from general public. It can go as far as the general public buying products that require pollination or honey or those sorts of things. So yes, the general public definitely has a role in bee health, just like it has a role in the rest of agriculture and everything we do. There's also a lot of research going on, the Western, and so the researchers have a role. For example, right here in Saskatchewan, we have the Western College of Vet Medicine, University of Regina, where they both have active bee research programs, honeybee research programs. The Saskatchewan Beekeepers Development Commission has a very active technical adaptation team. And one I forgot to add is actually the museum in Regina has a bee program. And then there's a lot of other out-of-province researchers, all playing a role in helping to give us better information and better techniques to keep our bees alive. We can't forget the role of the agrologist. And so when I say agrologist, I am an agrologist, but I'm not including myself. I'm talking about the field agrologists out there. The advice that you're giving to farmers also impacts honeybees. So if when you provide best management practices for farming, that's usually good for bees. And so you got to keep updated on what's going on. And, every time you're giving advice, all we ask is that you think about, well, hey, what's this advice going to do about bee and pollinator health? And then government. So yes, I am an agrologist, but I did separate this out because we do have specific programs for bees and beekeepers. And we do give advice to beekeepers. We help them to keep their bees healthier. I'm here on the left, and my role is not exclusively honeybees, but primarily honeybees, giving beekeepers advice on treatments and such. And then I also deal with other bees. I do deal with leafcutter bees and a bit with the other bees. And then we have Graham Parsons here on the right, and who deals more with the other bee species, but also helps with my regulatory role. So this talk actually straddles between the two of our mandates, but we do cover each other off quite nicely over time. So yes, we help to develop policy, we help to advise beekeepers, we help to make things work for the bee industry, giving a role. So how healthy are the bees out there right now? Well, if you read the news, they're apparently all dying. Not quite true. Uh, so we see headlines all over the place. We have headlines of pesticides cause largest mass bumblebee death on record. Why so many dead bumblebees? Millions of bees have died this year. It's the worst bee loss in recorded history. So it all looks doom and gloom. I'm going to say, yes, we do have problems, but no, it's not all doom and gloom. However, my next slide kind of might suggest otherwise. But even in this slide, I do see some opportunities. So this slide is actually, if we dig down into it, we could talk about this for 10, 15, 20 minutes alone. But generally, what we see is that the province with the best honeybee wintering is in green, middle is yellow, and then the worst is red. And we see Saskatchewan has a really good track run. So uh, basically, we're doing very well compared to our neighboring provinces. A lot of that's to do with really good beekeepers taking care of their hives very well. We had a horrible year last year, a few things going on. So yes, when beekeepers take care of their hives and deal with their diseases, they do quite well. Leafcutter bees seems to be, they do have some issues as well. However, they're holding their own better than honeybees. And a lot of that is going to be market related on if they're growing or decreasing the industry size. So we're going to cover that a bit more in a few minutes. And other bees. So this is a very complex question because there's at least 386 different species of bees in prairie grassland ecoregions. And these are in various states of stress. Some bees are doing well, and while other bees are hurting a little bit more. So what exactly is impacting bee health? First and foremost, diseases. So this is by far the biggest driver of bee health. And bee losses. Honeybees, when you see we have huge losses for honeybees, typically it's a single disease that's driving it, and that is varroa mites. I don't actually have a varroa mite highlighted on this here, but this is a new mite that I've been working with, Tropolelaps mite. It's not in Canada yet. It's not in North America yet. But if it arrives, it could be as bad as varroa mites. So when we went from 18% mortality in the year before last to 43% mortality last year, the driver was diseases, and that disease was varroa mites. There's a lot of other different diseases, but that's what's the varroa mite is driving the big losses. For leafcutter bees, yes, they do have a disease issue, and that is the Teramalis parasitoid wasp. And basically, they've lost their control. They've lost their registered control for this wasp. They've still been able to keep it down, but it seems to be growing, and they're working on getting new control products. And then if the other bees, diseases can be spillover from other species. For example, the viruses affecting honeybees can spill over to wild bees. And also we have some bees, like bumblebees, imported for pollination purposes, and diseases that are brought in and the bees that are brought in for pollinating things like greenhouses can spread their diseases to the other bees. Insecticides also are somewhat of a driver. This happens every year. And beekeepers do know why people are spraying. They're protecting their crops. We do the same. We treat our diseases. But yes, we do get drift problems or spray problems when people might spray a flower that's in bloom. And so we do have some insecticide kill every year. This is not nearly as big of a driver as the honeybee diseases for the bee health. Bee forage is also big driver. So the forage, what the bees have to eat. Canola is a great crop. Bees do fantastically on canola for about 4 weeks. Typically, bees need a continuous honey flow or pollen flow in order for them to stay healthy and keep growing their brood. And in with bee forage, we also have nesting sites. So this picture is a touch blurry, sorry about that, but we see a lot of land and a lot of trees being taken down pretty much everywhere in the province. And it's really removing and that's to go into tillage, and it's really removing those nesting sites and the ability for the wild bees to have their brood and lay their brood. These strips also provide a lot of additional benefits like flowers or nutrition. One you're probably not expecting me to say is quinclorac and glyphosate. So when I say this is impacting bee health, it's because it's impacting the markets. So we're finding that quinclorac and glyphosates are leaving residues that's being picked up in honey, and that's impacting our ability to hit markets overseas that require 0.01 parts per million. So we're finding 0.5 parts per million quinclorac, 0.05 parts per million quinclorac, and 0.12. So it's affecting our ability to get into other markets. And this is also true with glyphosate. So we're finding glyphosate in honey, which is restricting some of our marketing. And finally, markets are really impacting bee health. Now, that seems like a weird thing to say, but for example, with leafcutter bees, the whole population, the drive is based on the price of alfalfa seed and leafcutter cocoons. When it goes down, the populations go down. When it goes up, when the prices go up, the populations go up because farmers can make money, which makes sense. Now, with honey, what happens is we can't be as reactive. Honey beekeepers are keeping only honeybees, so they can't make that shift. So people cut corners when the prices get too low. And if they cut the wrong corners, they're not taking as good of care of their bees, and we see higher mortalities. Why is bee health important? Well, basically, there's a few reasons. The income from the honey is big for beekeepers. It's what's paying the bills. The income from pollination also pays the bills. And these big beekeepers, the ones that are running 5,000-6,000 colonies, are hiring 30, 40 different employees per year. So in a small town, this has a big impact on the industry, on that town, because they're not just paying employees, but they're also buying implements, they're buying groceries, they're buying everything in order to keep going. Same's true with the leaf cutting industry. Money goes back in and supports the small communities. So I mentioned some of these beekeepers have 30 to 40 employees, once again demonstrating that these are big businesses. This picture on the right is the honey production in 1 year from one of our bigger beekeepers. More importantly, though, is the value of the pollination of the crops. Yes, I know I used another picture of canola field, but that's because that's where honeybees provide the most impact. Just because there's so much canola out there. The best estimate is that honeybees can bump canola yields up by 20%, or wild bees as well. So that is huge. That is basically zero input for the farmer, giving up to a 20% bump in production. Where else can you get that much bang for $0 input? Not very many places, I would suggest. So, but if we get into other things, for example, strawberries, currants, raspberries, all these things, red cherries, sour cherries, all these things require pollination. Things like red clover, alfalfa, borage, hascap, sweet cherries are pretty much 100% reliant on, we'll call it animal pollination. Most often bees, but there's other things that can do the pollination as well, beetles, birds, and other insects like ants. So yeah, lots of different things. So the impacts are huge. When I said $40 million for the value of honey for the province, you basically multiply that by 10 to 20 times for the value of the pollination that the same bees give back to agriculture in Saskatchewan. So it goes from 40 million in honey up to 400 million to $800 million worth of benefits for agriculture in the province. And for every farmer out there, or every agrologist out there that deals with canola, you are 100% dependent on leafcutter bees and honeybees. There is a whole industry of hybrid canola seed production that requires these bees. Every single seed that is planted into the ground that's of hybrid canola seed is because a bee visited that flower that the seed came from. So we are all dependent in agriculture for that canola seed. And it's huge, but we also need the whole industry. So we can't just have beekeepers just doing canola seed production or providing pollination for canola seed production. We need the rest of the industry as well. And that's to be able to make sure the bees are healthy enough to go in and there's enough bee populations to go in to do this proper pollination. So yes, absolutely key for aspect of pollination. So the entire canola industry is 100% dependent on bees for its existence at its current time. So what can be done to help? Well, this one's faced squarely at Graham and myself and a few other people like ourselves, giving better advice and better tools for beekeepers. Getting beekeepers to just basically do a better job, getting them to beekeep better, giving them better, mite controls or disease controls. One that impacts agrologists and farmers: pesticide stewardship. Follow the labels, use thresholds, use the least toxic chemicals to be beneficials. Spray when the bees aren't active. So spray between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. So during dawn and dusk, especially if you're using the insecticides. Check for bees in the area. And one nice way to check for bees in the area is a free communication tool called Driftwatch, where it's a voluntary program, so not every beehive is going to be in there, but you can check and see where beehives are before spraying events occur. Provide opportunities for pollinator habitat. I was really pleased to see that or hear that Dwayne and Dina were talking about pollination benefits from unseeded acres, or where you could add alfalfa or some flowering plants that give benefits to the bees and to the pollinators. So yeah, provide those opportunities. This allows for nutrition and nesting sites. Just like us humans, we need a good balanced diet that is there all the time. So they need the spot to raise their brood, and they need a balanced diet to be able to feed their brood, just like we do. So things you can do is add organic buffer strips. They're easy to put them in an easy place to put habitat, places that are simple to farm around. Dwayne had even mentioned that I believe it was his father or father-in-law left 35 acres unfarmed because it was too hard to farm and it saved the money. That's perfect. That's great for the wild bees. Here's an example. I know we're not going back to this. This looks like maybe 1960s from Ontario, but it just shows because of the farming habitat. But it just kind of shows the optimal for forages. We've got the crops, we've got buffers, we've got trees. So a good mixture is a good option for bees. And you can get things like multi-purpose pollinator habitat. These have great benefits for farmers. They reduce wind and water erosion in bad areas, carbon sequestration, can be used for forage for livestock, lengthen crop rotations, give breaks from club roots. You know, you can use those saline soils for something. That was mentioned in the last talk as well. Gives beneficial insect habitat. So basically, you know, those lacewings, those ladybugs, it gives them an opportunity to establish in the margins, reducing tillage in awkward locations, and on and on and on. And with that, I will leave it there and take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Geoff. I think this is fascinating to hear more about an industry that I think, so many of us are somewhat familiar, and obviously some more than others, but its manner in which it's integrated into, both landscape-wise and economically speaking. Okay, I'm going to start with a couple of questions